Hans-Ulrich Klose, welcome to the Institute. It's good to see you again. I wanted to talk about a couple of things. One of them is the elections coming up, and the September 22nd election is drawing near. No one really knows what's going to happen. There's a lot of speculation about whether there could be a continuation of the current government, perhaps a repeat of the Grand Coalition from 2005 to 2009, in which the SPT was the junior partner. There are some friends of mine, and I'm sure friends of yours in the party, that say if the election results dictate, the mathematics of the election dictate, that a grand coalition, as you call it, as CDU as a senior partner, SPD as a junior partner, is one possibility. There are a lot of SPD people that say, we're not going to do that. We had a bad experience the last time. We came up short. We don't think it's a good idea for the party. Others say it's a matter of state. I mean, we have to have a responsible government, and that's a rather large chunk of responsible people in a grand coalition. And finally, the Grand Coalition didn't really do too badly in 2005.
It did very good, actually.
Exactly. So how do you feel about it personally, and what would you advise your colleagues about whether, if they are confronted with this choice, what they should do?
Well, my first answer would be it's a speculation, and I personally believe that there is not too much willing for change in Germany, actually. So my first expectation is that the present coalition will win the elections. The Christian Democrats are in the polls around 50, at least close to 40%. And the Liberals, well, you never know it, but I would say they are up to 6, maybe 7%. Since all the votes below 5% just step aside, 45, 46% would be enough to have an absolute majority in parliament. I believe that this is the probable outcome of the election. In case this does not happen, I don't exclude, and I feel, I observed the discussion going on in Germany, I don't exclude a Christian Democrat and Green government. The Greens are normally located on the left side, and that's true, but they also have a conservative membership and electorate. They are conservative about environment questions and so on. A grand coalition is probably the choice of 70% of the population. My objection against the grand coalition is not tactics. It is about the stability of democracy in Germany. The stability of our system depends to a large extent on the fact that you have two major parties that can take over whenever necessary. And we had changes in government in the past, Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, Christian Democrats, and so on. If the Social Democrats would become one of the smaller parties, a possible partner for coalitions for a long period, I believe that this would hurt our democratic stability. And since we have been punished, although the Grand Coalition did do good work last time, we have been punished heavily, going down to 23%. I'm afraid we would go down again and would go below 20. And this is something that I consider to be some sort of danger for the stability of democracy in Germany.
I see. So either way, you would prefer the SPD if the current coalition can't continue, and there was a mathematical possibility of a black-green, as you say, a CDU-green coalition, you'd almost prefer that to a grand coalition. Do I understand?
Well, I think it could work, and it makes a lot of sense for especially the Greens to show that they are willing to take over responsibility with a greater party. And I mean, looking at the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, one of our problems is that we are not too far away from each other.
Right.
So if the Greens can go into a coalition with the Social Democrats, Why, my goodness, not with the Christian Democrats under the leadership of Angela Merkel, who everybody knows has gone a long way towards the center left, and
Right.
some people in her own party say that she kind of social democratized the Christian Democrats. I don't see any obstacle for such a coalition.
Interesting you say that. Obviously, you have some fragmentation on the margins. Let's set aside the left party, which will probably get into the Bundestag again, but won't necessarily
Yeah, I mean,
be.
the left party is kind of a joker, but it's not a joker for the Social Democrats, especially for foreign policy reasons. We never had a positive voting of the leftist party on Europe, and they still recommend us that we should go out of NATO as soon as possible.
Right.
I mean, that is something that we cannot accept because we stick to the 4 words foreign policy program, never again,
Right.
never alone.
Right.
And
Right.
never alone is a very important point.
Yeah. Let me segue into something that you mentioned before in saying that the Greens, I mean, actually all 4 parties, if you think about it, in the CDU, CSU, the SPD, the Greens, and the FDP, you have a fairly large consensus on foreign policy across that spectrum. So let's talk about Syria for a minute. That looks as if at the moment we're speaking now on September 11th, there is a possibility that there might be a diplomatic solution to this. When you look at the election coming up on September 22nd, does this drive the election in one direction or another, this Syria conflict, or is it something that Germans look at from the outside and say, we're really, first of all, we don't want to get involved militarily, that's a given.
We are involved already because we have Patriots in Turkey,
Okay.
and we have AWACS airplanes in the air, and there are German soldiers too.
Well, let me ask you the provocative question then. If there was a military strike, would those,
I don't think we would stay in.
we wouldn't make the mistake
Not-
that you
not
made? in
Libya
Libya?
again.
Okay. So you're already involved. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that this is a 75, 85, 95% of the Germans would not like to see Germany involved in the military move if there is one, right? Even though you're involved in that technical side. But does this drive the election?
I'm afraid not really. It's not foreign policy that stirs the hearts and the minds. It's interior problems. However,
Domestic issues.
we should make foreign policy a point of the debate, because as we both know, the so-called pivot to Asia, rebalancing, means that the Europeans probably will have to take care of problems in their periphery, south and east, by themselves. The United States will stay in Europe, and they will help if necessary, assist as they did in Libya. But they will not take the lead, probably, as they did not in the case of Libya. And we have to get prepared to act consequently. And that means that we have to kind of reconsider security policy in Europe under strategic objectives.
Right. And that's one of the things that I would say from my perspective here in Washington, that it is important that when we look across the Atlantic, that we look forward to a coherent voice on that side of the Atlantic. In other words, the notion of a European foreign policy is really much more something in theory than much sometimes in practice.
You're right, unfortunately.
And so trying to get to that point, these issues come around and they somehow push you in that direction. Of course, it's a long way to get 28 nations under one roof, but that's your job, isn't it? I mean, that's the next step of the EU?
It is the next step, but it will continue to be difficult.
Right.
And I believe it all depends on the so-called big ones. I'm always talking about the so-called big ones because
Right.
on the global scale, also the big ones in Europe are small ones. But the so-called big ones have to stick together and have to maintain sufficient capabilities to handle a difficult situation when it comes up.
Yeah.
And I personally believe that there will be a lot of finger pointing in the future towards Germany, because a lot of countries in Europe are talking about Germany as an unwilling leader,
A reluctant hegemon,
a
as the Economist put it recently. Yeah.
but a Polish foreign minister, just imagine,
Right.
was talking about Germany as the indispensable nation
Right.
in Europe.
Right.
And I think we will have to respond to this. You know, we don't like to lead for reasons that are in our history. But I think we have to take a strategic look on the situation that we are facing in the future.
Well, I think you're already doing that in ways that are pretty demonstrative on the economic front. I mean, you are setting a leadership role out there with regard to keeping the Euro zone stable. I think that's clear. Everybody sees that as a given. It's just that I think that the next step of pooling sovereignty with regard to foreign policy issues is a tough climb.
It is very tough, because that's for some states and some governments, it's the core of sovereignty.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, can you imagine La Grande Nation or the British line without the red carpet? I can't imagine that.
Well, it'd be interesting to see, just to mention this, and we'll come back to this at another time when you're back with the Institute. You do have European elections next year as well in May, and it'll be interesting to see what the next generation of leadership in Brussels does with these kinds of tasks and these kinds of objectives. Let me move on to a third topic. We're talking on September 11. You must have been in Berlin in September.
Yes, I was in Berlin.
And I was here. And of course, we all were frozen in place at that point. One of the things that you remember, and I remember, that your SPD Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, said that very day, is that we are with you. And he also said, in an unlimited way.
Unlimited solidarity.
Unlimited solidarity. I think you've said to me before in other conversations, you might have questioned whether that was the right word, but the point I guess I would like to, or the question I'd like to raise with you is today is it's 2013, that was 2001, 12 years ago, hard to imagine. Do you have a sense of what we've learned in the sense of facing threats, maybe not just like that, but around the world together? Or has the last 12 years or so made it more difficult to reach a consensus on what it is that we face out there in terms of threats?
Well, we all know that the phenomena of international terrorism is there. It's not over. A lot of countries have had a bad experience, terrible experience with the terrorism. In Germany, so far, excepting an event down in Northern Africa, we haven't had real big attacks like the British had or the Spanish had. But I always telling the people in my constituency that there's a high probability that someday it's going to happen, because there's not a 100% guarantee against terrorist activity, although we have become better. There's a pretty good cooperation in the meantime between those who are responsible for security in different countries. And actually we are helping each other, which is a good thing after all when we are looking at the present NSA debate that we have in Europe and especially in Germany.
Right. I mean, that's a problem that we share. We have to solve that problem. As you well know, Americans are just as upset about this as you Germans are in terms of the invasion of privacy and the overreach.
There's a discussion here, same as it is in Germany. Maybe in Germany we are a little bit more critical, which again has to do with our history, because we have witnessed two dictatorships in the last 100 years, and especially the experience with the so-called Stasi, security organizations in the former GDR, makes people rather reluctant with everything that is for surveillance and hurting data privacy. I think we should make it quite clear to our public that what NSA is doing is not comparable to Stasi, because Stasi would take all the data and would read it really, which is absolutely impossible for NSA. They are just looking for connections that could be dangerous. I think that we should discuss this problem under the keyword of proportionality, what is necessary and what is not necessary. And the United States should stop as soon as possible what you could call spying against allies. If that's over, we are on a normal path again. And we should do it fast, because at the same time we are negotiating about TTIP,
Right.
transatlantic trade and investment partnership. And I think for strategic reasons that we should make it a success.
Well, I think that should be the rational way to go about it. Unfortunately, politics is not always rational. You know that.
Yeah, but at least politicians should try to be
Yeah.
rational.
Now, speaking of that, as a final comment, a rational politician is leaving the Bundestag, and it's been 30 years.
31 exactly.
31, yeah.
And yes, my feelings are, so to say, bittersweet.
Yes.
Both. Bitter because I will miss what I think it's the most important thing. I believe 60–70% of my job is going after information, finding the best arguments. And in a democracy, the best way to value arguments is talking with others. And the working group of my own party, the Foreign Relations Committee, the way we have been discussing, you know, it could happen that somebody would say, listen, I haven't thought this to the end. I'm now going to think it for all of you so you can hear it. Please correct me, criticize me. And that's the best thing to do.
On both sides.
I'm going to miss that one.
I'll bet you will. But you kind of embody something. I mean, you said that to me years ago when you said you started as a high school student somewhere in Iowa or
Clinton, Iowa.
Clinton, Iowa. Talk about authentic American experiences. One wonders today, just as a kind of a final exchange between the two of us, because it's shaped my life as well, although my experience was in Germany when I was in college, but it's shaped the rest of the next 40 years. Is that sufficiently still happening in your Bundestag? I'm a little worried about the fact that our members of the Parliament, our House and our Senate, don't necessarily have the same organic relationship that your old friends like Richard Lugar and others did, largely because some of them actually served in Germany. Is that organic relationship melting?
What is different to former decades is, of course, that the number of American troops in Germany and families connected with this is not as big anymore as it used to be. And those were, on a normal scale, ambassadors. They could tell about each other.
Right.
When you look at the Bundestag, I would guess that we have about, I would guess at least 30 members of parliament who have either been exchange school kids or went over to the United States to study over here.
But out of 620?
Yeah, but that's pretty much.
30?
No other country can match that number.
I see.
And all these people have experience and they contribute. And they contribute. I mean, I'm just one. But I think one of my jobs and achievements was always telling my colleagues, if we're discussing transatlantic problems, please try to look at the problem with the eyes of the other side of the Atlantic.
Right.
That's the real story.
Yeah.
You have to see the problems of the world, including your own, with the eyes of the others.
Yeah.
And that's something actually that I learned in Clinton High School.
Is that right?
Yeah, because all these young colleagues asked me a lot of questions, and suddenly I started to look at my country with the eyes of my classmates.
Yeah, I know. I've been through that before. We're not going to say that we're going to miss you, because you're not going to be walking away from this German-American partnership that's meant so much to you. And we'll look forward to having you back and helping us understand through your eyes what we're doing, and I'll try to give you a little bit back in return from me. How about that?
I keep going, and I don't have the intentions to step out of politics. I'm stepping out of parliament. That's the difference.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you.